Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ।
This week, we are hosting the University of British Columbia Sikh Student Association for a discussion event on the farmers' protest. Today, we are joined by Dr. Prabhjot Singh from USA. He is an activist who is leading various protests in the US and continues to stand with farmers and shine awareness of how the farmers' protest specifically affects Sikhs and Punjab. Thank you for joining us today, Bhai Sahib. Please let us know more about the work that you do.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. So my field is education. I work with children with special needs, behavior disorders, emotional disorders. I did my doctorate in educational leadership as well. So and my dissertation was also on special needs students. So conversations about equity, equality, all those different types of things are right up my alley. So any inequities we see in society kind of line up with the work that I do professionally as well. So the farmers' protest, the Sikh genocide, all of these things fall within the realm of what I work with.
All right, so we're going to start off with a brief overview of the history of this issue. So,
Sure.
Paisab, can you please give us a brief overview for those who are unaware?
Sure. Yeah. So for those of us that are still figuring out what the farmers' protest is all about, the Indian Parliament passed three bills in in Parliament that were widely opposed, but passed anyways, as a lot of legislation in Indian Parliament passes. And basically, what those farming bills do is create an environment where small farmers will essentially be suffocated out of operating their own farms because of rising debt and demands and everything required to operate a small farm. So, with that said, larger corporations will walk in, they will buy their land because they're going to be under so much debt. So, when they buy their land, they get rid of that debt, but they lose their land. And so a lot of farmers have risked it all to say that, in 84 you attacked us in a different way and now you're physically taking our land. So coronavirus or not, any virus or not really, we're going to die anyways. So we might as well do it fighting. So the farmers' protest started in September of 2020. They started specifically in Punjab, where we have the youth leaders, Deep Sidhu's Lakasadanas, leading protests from there. They marched from from Punjab to the gates of Delhi on November 26th of 2020. Um, and again, the government of India was actively suppressing them, actively stopping them from going there. They had to face water cannons, tear gas, barricading, but they marched through that and they set up camp at the gates of Delhi and along various borders. And a couple days later, Kisaan union leaders joined them and then took over the protest as far as leadership because it's a farming issue. So I think the key point there is the youth and the people of Punjab led these protests to Delhi. And then when they get to Delhi, a couple days later, the current leadership walks in and says, we are farmers' leaders. This is our issue. So go ahead and give us this leadership position. And here we are in February of 2021, and the farmers' protests are still happening. So it doesn't, negotiations with the Indian government make it seem as if the farmer bills will not be repealed. That's the language that they're using. That's the message that they're putting out. So, yeah, it's essentially at a deadlock right now. Yeah, so I covered it a little bit in the end. The current situation is There are various negotiations happening, and the Sangat, or the people protesting, have essentially said that if these bills get repealed, they get repealed, or we'll die here fighting. So that's the Sangat's mindset, and that's the message that has been pressured upon the union leaders to put forth to the Indian government. And the Indian government is basically saying, do whatever you want, these bills will not get repealed. Now, I think two things are happening in this situation. Number one, if the bills are repealed, then the government of India feels as if they look weak in society, that a protest can stop their legislation. And but if they don't repeal the bills, then the momentum keeps gaining. The protests are 110% peaceful, and so they're essentially sitting there, and it's only going to get more and more aggressive towards the government, hopefully, if the leadership takes it the right way. So they're in a bit of a bind when it comes to how to negotiate their way out of this. They don't want to look weak, but they don't want to be exposed to the extent that they are, where now Hollywood celebrities are getting in, NBA players, NFL players, actors. They're basically raising awareness. So um, it's hard to say which way it's going to go, but that's where the current situation is. Yeah, that's a great question. I think essentially this is where the crux of the farmers' protest lies. Couple things to remember. The Indian media will play a divisive game. They'll try to pin religions against each other, states against each other. They'll divide and conquer. And that's been their policy, not just during the farmers' protests. It's been their policy since inception in 1947. So divide and conquer is their strategy. And so when we say that, um, the reality of the case is these protests started in Punjab and then moved to Delhi, and then they became an international kind of support group. But initially, who had to face the barricades and the water cannons and the tear gas was the youth of Punjab and the people of Punjab. Even the Kisaan union leaders who are currently in charge, were stated that we need to sit in front of these barricades and do our protest here. But it was the people of Punjab, and it was the spirit of Sikhi within them that said, these barricades can't stop us. We will set up peacefully in Delhi at the borders, and we'll go from there. So, number one, I think the myth that we need to bust is everyone is trying to make this a religious issue. This is not a religious issue, but to negate the Sikh and the Punjabi contribution to this is also to invalidate the reality of what happened, and that is, this is where it started, and this is why it is at the pedestal, at the current place that it is because of their contribution. To your second point, a lot of celebrities in the West are receiving backlash, photos burned of them, effigies of them burned, death threats, because they are raising awareness for a very peaceful protest. And Sikhs have always been peaceful, and their heritage is rooted in peace, but their heritage is also rooted in fighting oppression. Anytime oppression has come to eliminate them, they've responded. So, how the Indian media wants to spin it is that Sikhs are violent, which is why I'm 0% concerned of, they're saying, well, I'll get to this point in a second. I'm 0% concerned that this is going to turn violent from the farmers' end, because had this turned violent, or if they wanted it to be violent, this could have been a very different situation. They set up in Delhi, and they, served langar. They treated everyone with equality, essentially the principles of what it is to be a Sikh. So that's what they displayed in Delhi, and that's what's happening right now. So they are a peaceful people. What we saw in the on the Red Fort, the only reason they responded to police is because police started hitting them with sticks, started throwing tear gas at them, barricading in front of them. So the moment they have that type of opposition, they will respond, but they will not unnecessarily, beat and be violent with people that the Indian media wants to spin it that way. So celebrities in the West are taking note of that, and they are voicing their concerns about it. They're donating money to it because it's a peaceful cause, and it always has been. Sikhs have always been a peaceful people. Even in when we think of these typical terms of the Karkuler, or when we talk about, in 1984, we see all these armed militants. Even that is in response. The innocents that were killed from the Indian were from the Indian government themselves. They planted people in there. They were violent with people, and then they blamed it on Sikhs. Except the difference between then and now is then Sikhs did not have media. They didn't have a viral circulation of information. So you see an image of a Sikh with a weapon and you think violent, you think terrorist, you think extremist or militant. And that's exactly what the Indian government wants to spin. However, now you see the videos of them helping police officers, of them actually protecting Indian government. The very people that are oppressing them, you see Sikhs helping those people. And the only reason we're able to know that widely in the West is because of the circulation of information. Mandeep Punia, who's a journalist who was arrested, the police said, had your video not gone viral, you would have been in jail still. So the video of him getting kidnapped by Indian officials went viral. And so it became very obvious the circumstances in which he was incarcerated. So when those things went viral, they're like, we really have no coming back from this. So we have no option but to release you. But can you imagine a time like 1987 or 1988 where people were taken into jails and never returned? And then on the opposite end, the Indian government will blame you for the militancy. They'll try to say that you're violent. They'll try to get you to stop speaking up. The very people that killed innocents in that time period, even now essentially, were labeled as the terrorists, and we still remember them as violent people, even though there is no difference between them and now. There's absolutely no difference. The only difference is the amount of information circulation. Now it's still the Indian media is prevalent, but a lot of people are getting their news from different sources. A lot of people are getting it from social media, from Twitter, from Instagram, from different. A lot of information is circulated that way, as opposed to pre-information when all you had was the Indian media's newspapers or the Indian media's version of events. So we till this day, our parents' generation, the older generation, I would say 45, 50 plus, that was such a traumatic time in their life that they refused to talk about. They refuse to even let their kids know about that time because they fear backlash. And this is exactly what the Indian government wants. Can you imagine a time where the government of India actually says there's a basically a bounty system on the heads of Sikhs? So the government walks in and they kill hundreds of thousands in Operation Shuddhikaran. Jaskaran, this would be a good time, I think, to pull up that iceberg picture from my Instagram. One second. There's something here. I see an image of it. Yeah, I can see it. That's totally fine. That works for me. Okay, sure. So as you guys can see here, in this iceberg, it was a really rudimentary and simple form of definition that a lot of people seem to resonate with. The farmer bills are the tip of the iceberg. The real crux of the issue is below the surface. when we talk about the Sikh genocide, when we talk about the decade of disappearances from 1985 to 1995, when we talk about Operation Blue Star and the way it was spun. So the Indian government states it a certain way, but eyewitnesses stated a very, very different way. They say this was absolutely Indian oppression. We were unable to leave the complex. 39 other gurdwara were attacked where the Indian government had no even claim of what they labeled as a terrorist. Sikh political prisoners. We have political prisoners languishing in jails right now. The people that assassinated the murderers that were the chief ministers of Punjab. Chief Minister of Punjab, 1995, Prabhjot Singh is assassinated, which was the absolute no-brainer move because he was sanctioning police officers to kill innocent people. So with his assassination, hundreds and thousands of innocent people were saved. Hundreds and thousands of Sikh youth were saved. But the people that took that action are still in jail. They're still in Tihar jail, Patiala jail. We're talking about Balwant Singh Rajwana. We're talking about Jagtar Singh Hawara. It's very, very unfortunate that the Indian media has been successful in painting certain people as terrorists and militants and extremists, but they've given nothing but every single breath, every moment of their life to the Sikh struggle. And we remember those people as armed terrorist militants. When we move on to Operation Woodrows, this is when the Indian government went from village to village in Punjab. I'm going to be posting about all this on my Instagram soon. I just can't find the time with all these new updates. But Operation Woodrows is when the Indian government went from village to village, picking up Sikhs that were between Sikh males from the age of 15 to 45, and essentially they were never seen again. They left their house under police custody, and they were never seen again. Their bodies were not even returned to the family. The families would say, "We don't even want you to return our son. We already know he's dead. Just give us his body back so we can cremate him according to our rituals, according to our religious requirements. Let us cremate." And even that was not supplied to them. Operation Shuddhikaran is when Indian police officers went on record saying, "We are going to change the genetic makeup of a generation of Sikhs. There will be no Sikhs left to resist." They went around and they raped our women, saying that they will now give birth to our children, not Sikh children. So we will erase a generation. So when we talk about the history of Sikh oppression and where these farmer bills, the real resistance started from, we can see that the farmer bills are a very small part of Indian oppression when it comes to Sikhi. And so despite the killings, despite the trauma, despite the rapes, despite the erasure of a generation, despite the drugs that were peddled into Punjab, hoping that the youth would get hooked on them, despite Punjab being forced to only be an agricultural industry, they're still resisting. And the Indian government cannot figure out why it is that these people just won't go away. And if you just look back into the history, even when there was hundreds of Sikhs left living in jungles, even then they did not give up resisting oppression. Even then at midnight they would strike in Mughal armies and they would release the innocent women that they were kidnapping to take to different countries. They would release them even when they were in the hundreds at the brink of extinction. So just looking back at history a little bit, you can see that this is not a nation of people that is willing to give up. And I'm very happy to say that this is turning into an all India, all religion type movement. And the Indian media is kind of exposing themselves as biased, as fraudulent. So that exposure is happening, and I'm very happy to say that. But to disregard this whole glacier, to disregard everything I just said within the larger context, is again to negate the reality of what is going on. I talked a little bit of over my points, Jaskar, and if you want to pull up that other thing, um, if there's any disagreement, the other one that said, one second. Yeah, that one. Yeah, okay. If you go to the next slide. So a lot of people are saying farmer protest, But this is the situation that we go back to, that Punjab and India goes back to after the farmers' protest ends. They're facing a water crisis. Now the timetable has been moved up to 2035 to essentially turn the land of Punjab into a desert. Punjab is the only riparian state in the country that does not have rights to its own river waters. Its river waters are diverted to the rest of the country. So, by riparian state, I mean states that have rivers running through them. Punjab, Ab is water. Punj means five, is the land of five rivers. That was eliminated after the partition. The rivers that are left in Punjab, the water from them is even being diverted, and Punjab itself does not have riparian rights over its water, which is unlike any other state in the country. So they're digging 200-300 feet underground to find water to feed the crops because they've been told that they're the breadbasket of the country. So when you're the breadbasket of the country, you have a certain type of responsibility on yourself to continue to feed the country. But if it's at the expense of your lands, if it's at the expense of your existence, I think it's something that needs to be explored. So Punjab will turn into a desert in the next 10 to 15 years, whether or not these farmer bills are passed. Whether or not they are successful or unsuccessful here, this is what will be happening to Punjab, because Punjab's government, we're talking about the Captain Amrinder Singhs and the history, we're talking about the Badals, all these different people have sold Punjab to an extent that it is crippled. And now they are attempting to make a comeback. So go ahead and go to the next slide. 43% of lawmakers in Indian parliament are facing criminal charges. So now you can see how laws get passed in India, even though there's so strong opposition. If half of your parliament is people that have criminal charges, kidnapping, rapes, I mean, we're talking about a country right now where the prime minister is directly implicated in the murder of thousands of Muslims in his home state of Gujarat. We're talking about a government, a Modi government, where Amit Shah, who's the home minister, is directly accused of killing the judge, Justice Loya, who was going to basically say that you are guilty of this crime of murder, because Amit Shah got two or three people murdered in a different state. And Amit Shah basically tried to bribe this judge first, and then this judge died, not blew up, I'm sorry. This judge died under unusual circumstances. His family reports, injuries to the back of his head, blood on his shirt, but the doctors said that it was a heart attack. And his family is refusing to speak up for fear of retaliation. So this is the government, and this is not exclusive to the Modi government. This is how the Indian government has run for decades. I would argue since inception. So though we're saying Modi this and Modi that, just know that this Indian system has a long root in oppression. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Fighting a genocide. We know the genocide that exists. Tune into the page to get more information on this genocide specifically. I think we are buying into this argument. We are letting the Indian government define different things, different terminology, and we are silently nodding our head and refusing to show any type of opposition or any type of open mind or open heart to say that maybe these terms don't mean what they say. When they say terrorist, what does it really say? Because they've allocated the label of a terrorist to a potential Nobel Peace Prize winner in Ravi Singh, in Khalsa Aid. So what does this term mean? Kangana Ranaut keeps in the last few days saying, "Are you a Khalistani? Are you a Khalistani?" If speaking up for your safety makes you a separatist, if speaking up for your rights as a human being makes you a threat to the Indian democracy, that means there's a problem with democracy. You need to understand where these aspirations of a separate homeland where you can be safe come from. They try to paint Khalistan and Khalistani and these different movements as terrorist movements, as violent movements. But what the people are essentially saying is, we want to be safe. We want to be free from Indian persecution. So for us to accept this definition of the Indian government, that this is some type of a violent, radical, militant, extremist movement, is a discredit to our analytical capabilities. We are able to see what is being sold to us. So the Indian government, again, is focused on dividing. This is a united front effort. But for us to say that their definition is a definition of terrorist, or their definition of Khalistan is the definition of Khalistan, or their definition of violence is the definition of violence, that's a discredit to ourselves. And we need to look at those things from an analytical lens to see, what are they saying? What are the allegations being made? And what do these terms actually mean within the larger context of their news? Go ahead and go to the next slide. This is also a fact. We can look this up. I have a post as well on this page about internet scrubbing. So the moment you try to say, who is the most dangerous country for a woman to live in, you're going to get 10 articles at the top from Hindustan Times, from India Republic, from One India. All those things are going to be at the top of your Google search. And so even your search of history is going to be tainted with a biased perspective. So the fact is that India currently is two things. Number one, the highest in the world in internet bans by a lot. We're talking about 150 plus internet bans in 2020 for India, compared to 12 for the next leading country, which is Venezuela. So they're actively suppressing voices. This is a very, very dangerous country for a woman to live in. And that is the fact. So when we try to research these things on our own, we're going to have a struggle. We're going to have to look at reputable sources, because the news content that the Indian media churns out is very, very problematic. I was reading a story from 1980, I want to say, no, 1993 yesterday, where they arrested a woman whose husband and brother were in the Sikh struggle movement for Khalistan. And they said that this woman slit her wrists and she killed herself. But in actuality, when you look at the human rights report, it's basically that this woman refused, not even refused, she had no information about their whereabouts, and the Indian government tortured and killed her. And in the newspapers, it was published that she killed herself. She found a piece of glass and she cut her wrists. So this problematic narrative, again, has not just started with the farmers' protest. This has been going on for decades. The difference now, again, is we are circulating information at a rate that is unparalleled. We have not seen this in human society and civilization, where you can send a video from me in real time from a different country. It gets to me and I can send it to 100 other people who send it to another 100 people. It grows exponentially. So the internet and the information source is really our way out and our way to salvation. But again, the Indian government continues to ban the internet. They continue to have these Mark Zuckerbergs of very, very large social platforms in their pocket to say that you will speak the language we tell you to speak. The tweets of Bollywood actors, if you line 2 or 3 of them up, I remember seeing this, it was a template that they were sent by the Indian government. It was a template that they were sent. If you look at 2 or 3 of the tweets, they say verbatim the same things. They have verbatim the same hashtags. And that means they were sent a template and they were told to post it on their social medias. So we're talking about a very, very corrupt system from top to bottom, from Western countries in the social medias to the billionaire class in India, to the government, to the police, to Bollywood, all united to paint this farmer protest as angry farmers, when it is everything except that. It's people that are speaking for, number one, their rights as human beings, and number two, their safety. And so if you want to label them as terrorists or Khalistanis or violent or extremists or militants, you can go ahead and do that. But these people have a right to advocate for their right to live. These people have a right to advocate for their humanity. And if that fact will get them a certain label, then I think it should be worn as a badge of honor. I always tell these people that have had Twitter accounts banned and different things silenced, you guys must be doing something right. because they're not silencing the Kangana Ranauts. They're not silencing the Bollywood actors. They're silencing different people that have that are raising the real issues. And so that's really where your fight is. So where that shadow banning and where that account deleted and blocked as a badge of honor, it means you're doing the right thing. Go ahead, Jaskarn. Gurkhan, no, you can. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah. So again, going to my point of the farmer suicides being a small problem, the highest rates of farmer suicides were in Punjab even before the farmer bills. The farmer bills are the nail in the coffin, but farmer suicides and agricultural inequities have existed for many, many years, and they have forced all of these farmers to take their own lives instead of be in debt. So it's not like so these farming union leaders continue to be at the forefront of these protests and say, we've worked at this for 40 years. We've worked at this for 50 years. And no discredit to them, but the whole system is against them. So under their watch, Punjab has turned from a very, very fertile land to on the brink of extinction, to on the brink of becoming a desert, to the highest rates of farmer suicides in the world. So negotiating and protesting within the schema and within the allowance of the Indian government will always make it so that you end up losing. Farmer suicides are not a problem of the farmer protests. Farmer suicides are a problem from much before the farmer bills. So this painting of this is a violent movement, this is a terrorist movement, this is just about farmer bills, let's not talk about anything else. That's a discredit to the reality of what is happening. And so that's something that we need to acknowledge, and I think that needs to be articulated. Go ahead. No, no, you're good. You can ask your next question. I think we are at what? 12:43. With this protest? Great question. Number one is this type of format that we're using is raising awareness, is understanding kind of the way that the government plays these situations. They continue to be a divide and rule. They continue to paint Sikhs as violent terrorist people, even though that even if they were violent, this protest could have gone a very, very different way. So I have no concern that it will turn violent. And nor do I have concern that they will return resistance. That if someone comes marching on them, that they will return that. And they will say, you do not have the right to come at us this way. They have been protecting the innocents. They have been protecting even the police officers, giving them langar and saying that you guys are part of us as humanity. However, if you try to enforce your will, if you try to listen and speak the language of the Indian government and say that oppression is something that we need to bow down to, that will be returned. So, number one, I think the most important thing for us is to reevaluate our history. All these different reports of us being militants, of us showing pictures of Sanjay Singh with guns and the people with him. I mean, I've read multiple accounts of him paying for the Hindu protesters in his way who have had their shops burned. He said, "I'll pay for your shop to be rebuilt." He fought the cases of two Hindu gentlemen who said, we're in the same situation as you, Samji. The Indian government is oppressing us. He said, I'll pay for your case. These are the stories that they never will let out. They will tell you he was a terrorist and all his people were holed up in Harmandir Sahib and the attack was necessary. The fact that you have to attack a holy shrine, a religious shrine, and trap the people in there and burn the library and attack 39 other gurdwara around it, and for the fact that you say that it was a spontaneous attack and then replicas are found of you practicing on the invasion up to a year and a half before in a different state, that proves that it was not spontaneous. That proves that your reporting is totally bogus. And I think, again, that reevaluation of our history is the most important. That whole era where the Indian government justified killing our young men and raping our women and polluting Punjab and that whole region is something that we need to reevaluate and say, what is this? We need to reevaluate the terminology that they're using against us. We need to reevaluate what it is to be a terrorist in India. Is a terrorist truly someone that is violent in India, or is a terrorist someone that is a critic of India? We have a Jagtar Singh Jol who has zero evidence, not a shred of evidence against him. He's gone to courts 150 times. He was arrested in 2017. So he was arrested in 2017 and he continues to languish in Indian jails. And when they record him, they say, do you have any expectation that you'll make it out of this system? And he very blatantly and openly says, Sikhan da kehda insaf hai is desh vich. And he laughs while he's saying it. That there's no justice for anyone that is a Sikh or that is a critic. What they want you to do is roll over and bow down and say that I accept the ruling power. And that's unfortunately never been the history of Sikhs. Unfortunately for them, they have been successful in suppressing a large part of their population. Can you believe that Subramaniam, who's a high advocate in the Modi government, is saying that Muslims are not equals? He said they don't deserve the rights to be equals in our society. And there are 200 million Muslims living in India. And he's saying that that large part of the population are not equals. So he said, this law that we created, it's equality for equals. And Muslims are not equals to us. So there's, again, that clear caste system and divide that is being created by these problematic people in government. And for them to say that about 200 million people, they're scratching their heads and say, how can we not contain less than 2% of the population, which is 6? We killed them. We flooded their state with drugs. Half of them got displaced in partition. Till then, in 1966, we cut out a large part of Punjab in Haryana. We cut out a large part of Punjab in Uttarakhand, and we reduced the size of their state, but these people are not going away. And they're scratching their heads and saying, why do we continue to face so much backlash? And that is because the principles that Sikhs are born with, that is of equality of humanity, we as Sikhs are mandated by Guru Gobind Singh Ji, by our religion, by our dharam, to carry a kirpan on us. So for us to say that it's symbolic is also partly true, but partly not true. It's symbolic of our resistance, but it's also symbolic of our heritage of fighting oppression. And it is to say that this whole movement that they're trying to paint Gandhi as, Gandhi's reality is now coming out as being very, very problematic, as being submissive to the British colonizers, but he is idolized as this individual of peace, as the father of peace. He's on Indian currency. He is idolized as this figure, but he's very, very problematic. And so they're scratching their heads and saying that we are painting these people as Mahatmas, as angelic figures, as fathers of this country. But why are Sikhs not buying into that? Why don't they put their kirpans away? Why don't they put their heritage of history away and say, we will now be subservient to the larger system? And that has never been their history. It never will be their history, which is why we see the farmers' protests heading from Punjab to Delhi. Again, Very, very happy to say that they have now turned multi-religion and all India. But this is where they started. This is the roots of the existence of the farmer protest. So do not be concerned that they will be violent, because they never have been violent. They never will be violent. It's simply not a part of their existence. If they were going to be violent, it would have happened now. The January 26th events, there was of hundreds of thousands of people that went to Lal Killa in Red Fort. If those hundreds of thousands of people wanted to be violent, the city of Delhi could have looked very, very different. They marched on their path. When the police shot tear gas at them, they threw it back at them. When the police put barricades in their way, they moved the barricades aside and said, "Get out of our way." But they did what they needed to do and they came back. So it was not a violent movement, despite what the Indian media will tell you. It was not a terrorist movement. So I think, number one, we need to reevaluate these elements and also take them out of our context. To say that you believe in Khalistan is to say that you believe in safety and humanity. It's not a violent movement. It's to say that this term would not even exist if it wasn't for Indian oppression. So if Indian oppression goes away, that term goes away. They're very synonymous to each other. And it's something that we need to understand and not just buy into this Indian narrative that when you say you're Khalistani, or when you say that you resist, or when you carry a Nishan Sahib, that you're somehow violent. We need to take these things out of our vocabulary. And that is the path forward. So reevaluation, analyzing our history, and then number three, circulating relevant information. The Indian media right now is hell bent on painting this as angry farmers. They are hell bent on painting this as a violent movement. And again, that violent, they use Khalistan and Khalistani in that narrative. So whether you believe in it or not, whether you believe in the concept or not, or whether you believe that this is not the right time or wrong time to talk about it, putting all those things aside, the terminology itself is problematic. And it's something that we need to reevaluate. And it's something that we need to stop scapegoating. Because the moment we say that this is a violent movement, the moment we make Khalistan synonymous with violence and militants and extremism, we are part of the problem. So we need to take that out of our vocabulary. Sikhs have never been violent. I read the other day about a Sikh here in Fresno, California, who jumped into a river to save two kids that were drowning. He drowned and died himself, but he saved those two kids. This is the spirit of Sikhs. So the national media hails, the American national media hails him as a hero, but to Sikhs and to Punjabis, he's just another person. He's another person that exemplifies the best qualities in what we are supposed to represent. So a Sikh will never be violent. And if he is violent unjustly, he's not a Sikh. That's the way we need to understand these things. And the moment we start to understand and accept these and take problematic language out of our vocabulary is the moment that, again, you become a target of the Indian government. And becoming a target of the Indian government is probably a great, great thing. It has been a great, great thing in our history for the past decades, and it's a great thing right now. If you are a problem to the Indian government, what it's saying is you stand for safety, you stand for justice, you stand for resistance, you stand against problematic legislation, you stand against inequalities. That's what it means. Inanita, I mean, Rihanna is now a paid agent. Greta Thunberg is now a paid agent. Amanda Cerny, a UN ambassador, is now a paid agent. Everyone is violent. There's millions of people protesting. You're telling me if they were violent, the landscape of India wouldn't look very different right now? So we need to reevaluate what the Indian media is feeding us. These terms of terrorism and extremism and militancy and Khalistan, all these different things, we need to reevaluate because they have been used against us in a way that we are now nodding our heads and speaking their language for them. We are becoming roadblocks in our own path to victory. So, reevaluation, circulation of information, reevaluating your history, and taking problematic terminology out of our language, I think is one big step in the right direction.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. One thing I just wanted to add was kind of adding to the conversation from like an academic perspective. I think challenging the narratives that exist like within universities is also like very important as well. And one thing I just want to add is just like a week ago, I was attending lecture for my global politics class, and in that class we were learning about feminist theory, and one of the role models that was shown was Indira Gandhi. So it goes to show like the level of misinformation that does exist like in the diaspora and just globally in the world outside of India. So I think our responsibility as well is to try to challenge those narratives that have been pushed forward, and I think we have that voice to do that. So I think as well, like on an academic, like from an academic, I guess point of view, like being able to like spread new information and like actually spread what actually happened, whether that was in the 80s and 90s and what's happening now, is like incredibly important. And I think we have the ability to do that now.
Well, number one, I'll piggyback off what was said before me by Revelin Claude, and that's an excellent point, is that challenging popular narratives. There was a statue of Gandhi that was taken down in Davis, California, where there was an active protest when the community rallied and said, this is a very, very nonviolent figure. He's an aspiration for us. He's angelic. There was protesters there to counter that narrative. So one thing in the diaspora we can do is continue to produce legible and easily readable and effective narrative and effective writing. So that's something we can do. Publish articles, social media. If that's your thing, do it. If you're a comedian, do that. If you're a poet, go ahead and create poetry on this. If you're an artist, create resistance type art. There's a role for everyone within resistance. And I think writing is something that we can do if we're reaching out to our local newspapers, whatever it might be. Produce that content. We like to reduce our role and be reductive of ourselves and say that maybe we're not as capable as we are. If you really think about it, Kangana Ranaut tweeted something, I think it was yesterday or the day before, about eradication. There was clear genocidal connotations to that were called out, and her tweet got deleted because so many people reported it. We're talking about Twitter, a platform that is actively suppressing voices, that had enough reports to get a tweet taken down in the span of one day on that platform, on a platform that's suppressing us. That goes to show the power of our activism. And as a community, Sikhs and Punjabis and a lot of the world has been about activism. So go ahead and activate that within yourselves, whatever medium that might be. Writing, poetry, art, music, short stories, comedy, whatever it might be. Go ahead and activate that part of yourself, because that is meaningful. The picture of your breakfast or the selfie that you're going to take or whatever, there's a role for all that. But to say that consumes a large part of your life is going to be reductive of your value as a human being. So there are different avenues that we can explore. Myths that we want to bust. This is about angry farmers. This is not about angry farmers. This is about the existence of a lot of India and specifically the Sikh ideology, about Sikhi in general. If the land of Punjab, no matter how much it was reduced to now, if that land disappears, it's going to be a very, very large obstacle, perhaps something that is going to be almost impossible to overcome. I say almost because we've come back from worse circumstances. But this is not a position we want to be in. Number two, the people there are violent. The people there are not violent. They are responding to violence. They are resisting. So to paint them as violence, I've seen images circulated of a Nahang Singh with his karpan out. And it just so happens that I happened to be up on the night of the 26th, and watch the whole thing unfolding. The police was hitting protesters with sticks. The police was charging at protesters. So a Nahang Singh takes his karpan out and says, okay, now you're not going to mess with me. So what the Indian media does is they take the reverse image. They see a police officer retreating and they paint that Sikh as violent. And this has happened in our history. So this is about violence. Number two, there somehow terrorism has infiltrated. There have never been terrorists in Sikh history. All there have been is rebels, and rebels that have been rebelling against oppressive policies. So there all these labels of terrorists. They're saying it to Ravi Singh now. They're arresting artists. They're saying it about people in our history. There are people in Indian jails right now that are labeled terrorists. Within the West, their organizations have been labeled as terrorist organizations, and this is all part of this boa constrictor that is the Indian government that will continue to suffocate you until you have the life sucked out of you. Except what they have now feasted upon is the Sikh ideology, is the Sikh way of life. And the moment that becomes your prey, be sure that you're going to have some resistance. Number four, this terminology of Khalistan. For us to continue to scapegoat that this was somehow a violent movement, this was a violent movement, but it was from the Indian government in. So whether you agree that this is the path to safety, whether you agree that this is the proper time to talk about it, all of that stuff aside, just that language is something that we need to reevaluate. Khalistani Atangwadi aa gaya the. There was never any Khalistani Atangwadi. It was simply people that were saying, we do not accept your resistance, so you can paint us how you want to paint. The people in jail right now, they're not regretting their decisions. They're saying, until my last breath, I will continue to fight for this Sikh struggle. I will continue to fight for this cause. And those people are known as terrorists. So this is, again, perhaps one of the largest misconceptions, one of the biggest contrasts that we have between the reality of what happened and what has been painted to us as people in the diaspora, as Sikhs in the diaspora, as news agencies in the diaspora. This has perhaps been the largest misconception and contrast of our time. So it's something we need to start rooting out of our ideology. And the last and final thing, the argument that this is not about religion. Who do these laws disproportionately affect? If you are going to make Punjab an agrarian state, and you are going to force, if I grow a tomato or I grow a potato in Punjab, that needs to go to a factory somewhere else in the country to turn into ketchup or to turn into a potato chip. Why can those factories not be in Punjab? It's because the policies of the Indian government and then inducing their suppression on Punjab's leadership has made it so that Punjab is isolated to only farming. And even then, they are thriving. So to say that these farmer bills don't affect the very farmers, the 85% plus of Punjab that is farmers, to say that this is not a direct threat to them is, again, discrediting the reality of what is happening. This disproportionately affects Haryana. This disproportionately affects Punjab. And that's just the way it is. So you may not want to accept that this is a very specific and pointed threat at the reality of Sikhi, but that's exactly what it is. And it's unfortunate that all of these other farmers will get dragged under with these farmer bills. and it's really, really unfortunate. And I'm very happy to say that they are joining the protests and they are resisting and they are saying we've taken this corruption for too long, but they're doing it within the bounds of being peaceful, of sitting peacefully. The largest weapon we have right now is a peaceful protest, is to say that the people there are sitting, and if they get attacked, we will circulate that information and put pressure on external governments. This is not a luxury we've had in the past. So we have this luxury now, and it's something we need to take advantage of. This excuse that the Red Fort incident made things violent, it gave them an excuse. For us to even say that putting a flag, two flags, a Kasani Janda and a Nishan Sahib, on an empty flag post at the Red Fort makes it justified for them to inflict violence on us.
May I
That's
ask a question
saying that
about Red Fort?
Yeah, absolutely. But let me
Yeah,
finish this point. Go ahead. Go ahead.
so sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No worries. You're good.
Actually,
I think
finish.
I've made my point.
No, I just wanted to ask if the Kisaan leaders took any accountability for Red Fort, or like what they had to say about it and how maybe they're going forward after that incident. If anybody
Yeah.
knows about
So
where the Kisaan.
yeah. No, I can highlight what happened before and after. The 3 weeks before this tractor march, the Kisaan Union leaders and the artists, Punjabi artists, spent weeks saying that ਅਸੀਂ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਨਾਲ ਪੇਚੇ ਪਾ ਲੈ, ਅਸੀਂ ਦਿੱਲੀ ਦੇ ਹਿੱਕ ਤੇ ਚੜਨਾ, we are going to, we're going to take over Delhi, we're going to protest these laws. They didn't say anything to be violent, but they said we are going to protest these laws. They went from village to village in Punjab saying that. Now you have 200,000 tractors that show up to Delhi. And then you find out that the Kisaan Union leaders have agreed to a 5,000 tractor route, which is far from the capital of Punjab, or sorry, far from the capital city of Delhi. And so the people were like, what did we gather here for? Just to blow tail? Because you've somehow come to an agreement with the very government that you are trying to protest. How is it possible that you can correct laws from a government that you are agreeing to? They're giving you their policies. They're saying this is what is allowed. So when it came to accountability, had the Kisaan Union leaders said this event was 100% peaceful, our people are peaceful, they put a flag on an empty flag post, and if that's problematic to you, it's just symbolic of the pressure that you are putting. These people have been sitting on the streets of Delhi. Over 200 people have died. There's a lot of emotion being built up. Even then, they stayed peaceful. Even then, they only resisted when violence was put upon them. And for them to scapegoat and say that they were traitors and there was people that got people pumped up, you can't pump up hundreds and thousands of people being a one or two or three individuals. These people went with their own might, with their own spirit. So had Kisaan Union leaders taken some ownership and said, this is what our people do, it would have created an immense pressure on the central government. But what they chose to do is scapegoat, which is why a lot of their intentions now are being questioned, because Sikhs in the past have always been burned by problematic leadership that has come to agreements with the central government. So we're looking at them in a very critical eye. They're getting feedback in real time. But that is, I think, a quick, decent synopsis of what happened. If you're going to gather that many people and you're going to say gather, and then 2 days before the march itself, you're going to say we agreed to something else, there's going to be some issues there. You can't expect people to fall in line. And that's what we saw a manifestation of.
I would like
I
to.
just had
Oh, sorry. No, you can go first.
no. You can go ahead, Jeevan.
Okay, I just wanted to add that there's a really big myth that is going around. I've even seen it on BBC News because I live in England, obviously, and they were interviewing someone from Scotland saying, "Oh, Modi has offered to suspend the laws for 18 months. Isn't that a good thing? Why are you protesting?" I don't think that they understand that this is also a myth that the government is using. They've already ignored us for 2 months when they were peacefully protesting on the street. Modi didn't even make a word about the farmer protest. He just let his, little unions handle it. And then obviously, just to add on from the Lal Gila point, obviously, then he spoke his mouth and said, oh, the tricolor was um disrespected. That's the only time he's got directly involved in dialogue with the farmers is discrediting them. So people are saying, "Oh, just take the 18-month suspension." This is exactly what they want us to do. People are trying to play out like the 18-month suspension. We should take it because that's what we want. That's not what we want. It's a play by the government because obviously you've seen the progress with the government. There's been like what 11, 12 talks now. No progress has been made. What's going to be the difference in 18 months? They're basically telling us, um, they're basically using it as a point, but it's not going to work because what they're going to do is the same thing. In 18 months, they're just going to keep delaying, keep delaying, keep delaying, and they're basically just going to backpedal, and then after that, they're like, "Oh, we gave you your chance. Now here we go. We're going to put the laws back in." I think it's a myth to say that we've been given the solution when basically the 18-month suspension is exactly what they want us to play into. Is basically just put us in a corner, think we have power, and then they're just going to stall it out for 1.5 years and put the laws back in. Anyone has I think that's my opinion anyway.
I would agree with that 100%.
Yeah, thanks, Karan. I was just gonna say, usually, I'm very, open, and I would like to project my voice on any of these issues. So I've been raising my voice about this kind of stuff, and I want to know both sides of the coin because obviously in a protest, there's some good things, there's some bad things from both sides. So when it comes to these farm bills, we've been seeing that it's very negative and it's going to affect Punjab, especially in a very negative way. So a question for you, Prabhjot Singh ji, is there anything good coming out of these farm bills? Like anything that will help Punjab or the economy or the farmers? Thank you.
That's a great question, actually. I think that's the side of the coin that we never explore. And well, number one, will they help Punjab? I would say the answer is no, because the people of Punjab will be displaced. But will there be modernization in farming? Yes. And so, but that's not the request. If the request is the modernization of farming, the Punjabi people are very, very crafty. They're willing to work together as they've displayed. And so, if there's modernizations within farming that need to be had, now that's a different discussion. But to say that we're going to wipe you all out and bring in corporate structures, will there be a modernization in farming? Yes. Will there probably be a higher output in food? Yes. Will there be more regulation of prices? Yes. Well, the answer to all those questions are yes, but it's going to be at the expense of the people there. And so I think that's essentially where the crux of this argument lies is what what is the really the issue that we're trying to fight? Are we fighting corporatization? Are we fighting oppression? What is it that we're fighting? And I would say it's all of the above. I would say that there's a lot of positives that will come out of this, but it's going to be at the expense of human life. And I don't think that is a price that they should be willing to pay. Now, if they're saying we are going to create some type of modernization for Punjab, for Punjabi farming, or farming in general, I think that's a discussion that could be had. And I think that's a discussion that Punjabi farmers would welcome and actually embrace. But it's not where it is. And then considering the problematic history of India specifically with Punjab, I think that is likely a conversation that they don't want to have because that would say that you guys now take ownership of what you are doing and you guys just make it better. And that has never been the case. It's always been oppress or either fall in line, my way or the highway. And that's what we've seen. So, yeah, I think that's an excellent question. There will be positives from the passing of the farmer bills, but there will be substantially larger negatives.
Thank you so much, Prabhjot Singh ji.
Yeah. That's perfect, man. It works for me. Yeah, closing segments to wrap up. Reevaluate everything that's happened in Sikh history from an objective lens. Don't take the Indian government's narrative for it. When they tell you about Operation Shuddhikaran, it doesn't even exist. There's 3 articles that will come up, and they're 2 or 3 lines each. But you talk to the eyewitnesses in Punjab, and they say that the Indian government sanctioned the rape of thousands of women to change the generation of our people. So these narratives that we need to continue to question, these figures, these Mahatma Gandhis, these Indira Gandhis, Rajiv Gandhis, Modi now, all these different people. It's a play of parties. The Congress right now will say that BJP is the problem. When BJP is not enrolled, they say Congress is the problem. The problem is within the system, and that's something we need to understand. This is not a party, a solution. This is not, if you create your own chief minister, this is not going to create a solution for you. It's hard to say what the solution is really, but at the very least, you need to be aware of the forces that you're up against. And the forces that you're up against are oppression. Now, fast forward to the farmer bills. This is just that, again, that small aspect of oppression. These people have been pushed down, subjugated, discriminated against, killed, physically murdered, jailed. There's political prisoners in jail even today. That is the reality of existing within oppressive and violent Indian system. But they will paint you as the oppressor. They will say that you're the terrorist. They'll say that you are unreasonable for asking for your safety. So reevaluating that, taking out myths, stop scapegoating people, because it doesn't help anyone except the Indian government. You speak their language for them. So I think Diljit, as whatever figure he is, when Kangana told him, tell me you're not a Khalistani, just say the words that you're not a Khalistani, he totally ignored her. He said his own thing. And it's because if he was to say that I'm not a Khalistani or I don't stand with these people, it's to say that I accept your definition of what safety is. I accept your definition of what violence is. Violence has historically been from the Indian government towards Sikhs. Sikhs have always resisted oppression. So reevaluating, producing content. I cannot stress that enough. Whatever you excel at, do it more, because they have an unlimited amount of funds. They have billionaires in their back pocket. They have billionaires that are funding these things. But even then, they're struggling. Even then, the voices are getting out. Why is that? It's because the spirit that is filled within this protest, and it's the spirit that's filled within the faith of the people there. So that would be my closing statement. Do not ignore the religious aspect of it. Do not ignore the genocide aspect of it. These farmer bills do not solve your problems. Repealing is better than keeping them there, but repealing them even will not solve your problem, will not solve your larger problem. A party or a figure will not solve your larger problem. Only awareness and understanding can solve your larger problem. So that's what I will close with. Deep Sidhu is one of the figures, one of the people that led the protests from Punjab to Delhi. He faced the barricades. He had to escape police activity against him. So he left that and he got to Delhi. So Kisaan union leaders arrived to Delhi after these guys, after these Deep Sidhu guys and all these guys. So they mobilized the people of Punjab. They fought through barricades and tear gas and water cannons. They made it to Delhi. When they get to Delhi, they give the leadership to the Kisaan union leaders, who then turn around and say that these people are banned from speaking our stages. Don't say this is religious. Don't have Nishan Sahibs here. But the reality of the protest is they're doing ardas on a daily basis. There's Nishan Sahibs everywhere. They're doing Japji Sahib and Rera Sahib there. They're giving people langar. So this has everything to do with Sikh principles. Whether we choose to acknowledge it that way or is on us, but that is the reality of the situation. You don't need to paint it in a religious light. Those people, the very being, them down to a molecular level, is living and breathing the principles of Sikhi. So they go there, they do that. So the Kisan Union leaders banned Deep Sidhu from stage in December, even though he was the one of the people that got them there. Then, so clearly there was an ideological difference between Deep Sidhu. Then Deep Sidhu talked to the people. Various other very well educated, well articulated people said, no, actually, what Deep Sidhu is saying makes sense. Then those people were banned off stage. And so the Red Fort gave the Kisan Union leaders the opportunity that I would say they were salivating at, and that is to scapegoat. That is to say that the people that went there were traitors. The people that led them there, i.e., Deep Sidhu, Lakha Salana, these people are traitors somehow to get them alienated and kick them out of the protest. What happens when you do that is you lose a large part of the battle. You lose the spiritual aspect of it. Every movement, every revolution has one aspect that is symbolic. That's why they always say hosh te josh. They say your thought and your energy is what will bring this into fruition. What happens when you alienate a Deep Sidhu or a Lakha Sadhana or a Dr. Sukhpreet Singh Uduke, who are basically saying that our message is different than yours. Ours is also correct, but it's different than yours. The moment you ban them off the stage and say the people are not logical enough to come to their own conclusions, that's the moment you say we have ideological differences. And so you become undemocratic. You become a dictatorship by saying these people can't even speak on stage. So on the 25th, the Kisan Union leader, Balbir Rajewal, says that the person that you're talking about, he's talking about Deep Sidhu, he says this person has zero contribution to this protest. He doesn't come to any of our meetings. Or he's not, well, number one, he's not allowed, not the meetings. He doesn't come to the protests. He doesn't come to the congregations. This person is not a part of this protest. Even though this is the very person that mobilized this protest to begin with. So clearly you have ideological differences with him, and then you jump on the opportunity to call him a traitor. You jump on the opportunity to alienate him and get him kicked out of the protest. And then the people in the diaspora are saying, well, actually what you're saying doesn't add up. From a logical point of view, someone that has zero contribution cannot tell 200,000 people to go to the Red Fort. Those people went on their own. In fact, this Deep Sidhu figure went hours after them. And the people looked around, they couldn't find someone to be their voice, and they pulled him to the top. And he came down to the bottom, and then they pulled him to the top again because the people wouldn't leave. And they said, Deep Sidhu, tell these people to leave. And so he tells them to leave. They listen to him. They come down, and they go about that way. So by the time he gets back to the farmers' protest, he goes live on a tractor at the farmers' protest. And then the union leaders by this point have heard a Godi media version of the story that these people have killed people, have looted, have robbed, and they alienate him from there. Without having full information, they hold a press conference saying that these people are traitors, they're problematic. And so I think it goes to the poor leadership of the Kisan union leaders. Again, not discrediting their contribution. On the ground level, they have had a huge impact. They have been doing this for a long time. I would say that no one understands these laws or the implications of these laws better than they do. But to say that people are traitors because they don't agree with you, that's a dictatorship. That's not a democracy. So the alienation of the people that they called traitors, again, I would say I would wear that as a badge of honor. If you are a traitor to Indian media and now the Kisan Union leaders, the Lakha Sadanas, I mean, that means you're doing something right. That means your message will resonate with the people, and you are a formidable leader, and you have the opportunity to create some genuine change and some genuine awareness beyond these farmer protests. And I think that is their biggest sticking point and their motivation to alienate the Deep Sidhus and the Lakha Sadanas.
I think I can say it myself. So my question was, what are your thoughts on the current politics within Punjab? As in, like, are there any parties or figures who you think are actually genuinely wanting to help the people by preserving our language and getting back rights to waters and other things?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just evaluating the current leadership that we have, I think the nature of going into politics requires some type of compromise, and it always has. And when those leaders of Punjab are operating within a larger oppressive Indian system, their voices will not be heard, no matter how good they are. Even right now, the problematic leader of Punjab right now, Captain Amrinder Singh, he had to lobby and actually protest outside the parliament to even get the word to Modi and the central government that these bills will hurt my people, they will be problematic for our leadership. And they wouldn't listen to him. So he had to set up outside just to voice his concerns, not even get a resolution. That indicates to us how powerful the leaders of Punjab are. And that is not very powerful at all. So you can be great or you can be the worst. If you're the worst, it sucks for your people. If you're great, it's a little bit better for your people. But you are still operating within this larger umbrella of Indian oppression. And when you are trying to make things work in a system that is determined to make things not work, no matter how good you are, it's going to be a challenge. And I think that is the problem that we need to brainstorm and figure out. How do we make our leaders matter? How do we ensure that they're not sellouts? These Badals and these Sukhbir Badals and all these different people that have now corrupted the politics of Punjab were the same leaders that were in Operation Blue Star, who were in Harmandir Sahib, who rode in armored vehicles on their way out. And the people within the complex were killed. And we remember the people within the complex as terrorists. And we remember the people that were jetted out in armored vehicles and ran in Punjab and continue to sell Punjab out. We continued to give them leadership positions. So, again, this reevaluation. So, going back to your question, I'm not too aware of Punjab politics. I'm sure that there are people that will be better than others, but again, when you're operating within this larger oppressive system, no matter how good you are, it's gonna be difficult for you.
Cool, I'll just step in temporarily for Gurkaran Singh. But I guess we can move on to the next question. I know Jivdesh Singh's question has kind of already been answered, so move forward to Gurseevak Singh's. If you'd like to ask on voice, go ahead.
Yeah, sure, I can ask on voice. Is my voice coming through clearly?
Hanji, Hanji.
Anji, TAG. So my question is, why is there such a push to include Khalistan in the Kisaan protest at this point? So Sikhi and the situation in Punjab over the last 50 years, and if you look at it in a wider lens from 1865, is very important to the struggle. We've been all part of this struggle since the beginning,
Yeah.
right? Against the British and then against the Indian government and then their subversion. But my main point to really push here is that by including the struggle at this point and then constantly pushing it, it continues to forces the other parties involved at all levels to either disregard it, which we've seen when they get put on the spot, or they have to bashfully accept it, right? So then they take the label themselves. Why are we letting them redefine the Khalistan movement like this? And
I think that's a great question.
Even more so, I think it just feeds the media narrative that this is being hijacked. It continues to push it, and then these guys have to, step back and try to fight that narrative, which is creating this division. It's literally falling into that tactic, and I'm sure. I mean, I've seen TikTok videos, I've seen Instagram live videos of people saying, "Ha, main atankavadi haan. Because I'm a farmer, I'm going to be looped in with this type of bullshit because the Congress did it before." But then at one point, these people are going to become tired. Wouldn't this do more damage to our movement when we do end up getting to that table?
I think that's an excellent question, and I'll try to answer that briefly. None of what I was insinuating is saying that this is a Sikh struggle movement or this is a Khalistan movement. What I'm encouraging is for us to reevaluate that terminology to begin with. So I would say if you genuinely feel like it would be taking away from the struggle and that's not a battle you want to fight right now, that's That's 100% your choice. And that's for you to say that I'm just not going to acknowledge your narrative of what this is, nor am I going to fight it. I'll just ignore it. If you're going to call me a Khalistani or you're going to say what it is, that is something that now I understand. If you're going to call me a terrorist, you're going to call me violent, it's going to be something that I understand, but it's not something that I want to fight right now. So if you feel like you want to take, if that's taking away from your narrative, I would say that by understanding the issue, it actually energizes people because you were saying how they're getting tired. I would say the Sikh spirit would energize into people to continue to stay peaceful, to continue to be at those doors of Delhi, and to say that, you know, we're gonna put pressure in different ways. And how are we gonna fight that? So again, I don't know if I answered your question or not. And it's a very valid point that it may be taking away from your protest right now. What I'm encouraging is just for us to reevaluate and not take these terms at face value based on what the Godi media is feeding us. So
See, that's the problem, though. It's not my movement; it's our movement. And see, that's what I'm saying. You have to work. Like, for example, what happened with the Lal Killa incident. Of course, the Kisaan leaders are going to say that because they didn't have the information. They were separated from the parade. It's a basic tactic that they did, right? They blocked parts of the parade. How do you get 200 to 300,000 tractors through a barricade where only one tractor is allowed between 12 to 5? It doesn't make any sense. It was done on purpose. But I'm saying, like, this is going to continue to drive that wedge, and they want that wedge. And what happened right after that? They attacked single border. See,
right, yeah.
Playing into that tactic, because if we outside are going to continue to push back with Khalistan, like in my eyes, right, it's going to feed into my second question. I'll say it as well. Especially with Deep Sidhu, it puzzles me. Why has he become the voice of Khalistan in this entire movement when he's only saying what people are feeling with more compelling wording, rather than the facts, what the facts are, and pushing the movement tactically? I'm trying to think of it from a tactical perspective. Wouldn't pushing the Anandpur Sahib resolution and the main drafter of it, Sardar Kapoor Singh, be more effective? And you said before that we need to find a way to stop these sellout parties like Badal and Captain. Well, what's a better way to push the Anandpur Sahib resolution and Sardar Kapoor Singh ji? Because on the original resolution, Badal and Captain signatures are on it. And it would be a crutch against any subversion for these sellouts. It would at least deteriorate their position in a way that people won't take them seriously. Because let's face it, you said you don't know what Punjab politics are. Punjab politics generally is that for the first year, you're going to beat those people. And then towards the election cycle, you start to feed them. You give them free stuff. Sharab Banado, they vote for you. And you repeat the same cycle again. It's to break that cycle off. Because as soon as someone brings up a debate, communal disharmony, this guy is trying to be a separatist. We can't feed those narratives. We got to flip that narrative on them. And then the second part of it is activism only works to a certain point. But if we continue to just keep dwelling into our own echo chambers, we're not going to get those people on their side out of theirs.
And what is the way to do that?
The way to do it would be not to let the Godi media, let these people hijack those narratives, first of all. Right, Tiga? They're using those ideologies because India has been fed this brainwashed, semi-educational garbage for the last 36, 37 years?
Right.
And it's been continuous like that. So why don't you break it out? And it's been happening on the ground when these people have been exposed to what Sikhs are, what Nahang Singhs are, what these people have been pushing this movement for. Because I don't think anyone is saying that Punjabis weren't the important catalyst for this movement. Tiga, like the concept of langar, the concept of seva, the nishan sahibs, everything is there. But the campaign that we have to push for, I mean, a simple political message would be to put all the nishans at an equal level and put the tiranga on top. It like for us, that's whatever. Nishan sahib is mahan. It's above everything. Tiga. But to them, it's a threat then. Because then these guys are rallying with that unity. And it's not a compromise, but it's just to actually push our own narrative. I'm just saying, like, these are different
I
tactics.
see what you're saying. So I guess we have to toe that line of what is a compromise and what are we willing to give and what are we willing to not give. And again, this voice, I don't think Deep Sidhu is the voice of Khalistan or the voice of it. He's the voice of the genuine emotions of the people. And for them to label him a traitor, he even admits that it was a little bit too easy to get to Lal Killa. So that was a trap, whatever it might be. But even then, it was peaceful. Even then, nothing really happened besides putting two flags in a flag post, without even damaging the Indian flag. So what I'm encouraging is for us to question the leadership that is there. Again, I'm not pushing for them to be erased and for this whole movement to turn in a different way. What I'm saying is we need to, at the very least, acknowledge their contribution. Into how if Takath didn't cry on the 26th, this protest was going to start turning over on its head. So for us to let that happen again is going to be a lack of our narrative and a lack and it's gonna fall on our shoulders. It's hard to control this many people. What I'm saying is problematic is for you to label a large part of your support system as traitors in the Nihangs or whatever it might be. You will never tell the Nihang Singhs that carry the Indian flag over the Nishan Sahib. It simply can't happen. And they have a part in the movement too. If you want to only carry a green flag, they have a part in the movement too. What I'm saying is to unite, but to also unite against the powers that are united against you. Don't fight with each other. But if you're going to label your own people traitors, then those people I wouldn't consider as part of your larger movement or that narrative to be part of your larger movement. I'm
Again,
saying that
see,
narrative
that's
needs
part
to
of
be
my
rooted
first
out.
question, then, isn't it? Right? Would this not do more damage to the movement when we get to the table? Because if the Kisaan leaders have to compromise with each other and say we have to push these people away, or the Indian government is going to find justification, whatever it is, because we all know they're violent people. They don't give a shit.
Yeah.
They can do whatever they want. They have the
Yeah.
military, and honestly, the billionaires are not in their pocket. These guys are in the billionaires' pocket.
Uh-huh.
That's what I'm trying to get at. And like one suggestion, it's not really a question.
Yeah.
Awareness is good. The activism is good. The push is there. I think if you want to take legitimate action, and a lot of things here, like I'm in Toronto right now. I'm originally from BC. We're trying to find ways to see where RSS and BJP money, influence, and power actually is in our own institutions. Because 100%, if you go to your religious or theology wings, they're there. Their money is there. They're sponsoring professors to come over here and talk about this. At York University over here, we had a professor who was calling Sanjanal Singh a terrorist. That Guru Gobind Singh Ji was a bandit, a vagabond. These people get hired and they get funded to do this. While we're outside active, like we're in front of the consulate, sure, that powerful message is there. It rallies support. I understand that. But it needs to go a step further, or we're just repeating what we did for the last 36, 37 years, which has got it.
I would not only agree with you, but I would encourage you to do, like I said, within every movement, you're going to have different roles. If I am the type to speak, then for me to do the nitty gritty of the IT work is going to be a little bit more difficult. But there's people within that care about this cause that can fill that role. So if everyone's role can be boycotting problematic figures, it's just bringing those to the forefront. Everyone's roles can be saying that we're not going to buy from suppliers that get this money. That can be everyone's role. Everyone's roles can be going on Netflix and hitting a thumbs down on your Bollywood movies because those people refuse to speak up. But there are going to be things that you excel at naturally, that your organization excels at naturally. So do those. Because for us to say that your type of activism is somehow less than my type of activism is kind of reductive. So if your role is to find that money within your institutions, blast it. There's a place for it. If your role is to say, I am going to report from the ground, do that. That's what you naturally do. I think there are so many heads to this snake, to this Indian government snake, that tackling one will not solve your problem. You need to fight actively at all of them. And I think that ball is is beginning to turn. So again, agreeing on narrative or not, however you want to view different events, Sikhs have been peaceful. They will continue to be peaceful. We just need to be a little bit more tactical than they are. We need to be inclusive. If we are exclusive and say that these people don't have a space in our protest, even though they are genuinely caring for your cause, then it's going to present as a problem to you. It's going to create divides, and this is exactly what the Indian government wants. So an inclusive message of people that empathize with your cause, I think, is very important, no matter what that looks like, no matter what your type of activism look like.
Yeah. Again, like I understand what you mean by different roles, different emphasis. Like everyone has their own strengths, but I would encourage people, if there is a part of your seva that requires coding, learn it. Right? If there's a part of your seva that requires you to learn how to investigate things, analyze things, learn that.
Yeah.
Pratan Sikhs, honestly, if you look at even Maharaji Singh Ji's Vela, there was people that were engineers, urban planners, because that's my profession, but they were also Shastatari. They were
Yeah.
also political. They were theologists. They had mastered 5 different languages.
Yeah.
I'm saying, like, of course, work on your strengths, but make sure you have those other strengths ready to go as well. There's a whole reason why Nahang Singhs always say "Tayar bar tayar."
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah,
Mhm.
developing yourself as a person, developing what it is you're able to do. I know in over the past 2 months, I've learned to do things that I never would have thought I would learn how to do, but I was forced to learn them. So push beyond those boundaries. Prepare yourself as a person. Be tayar par tayar in whatever in that form, in your form of tayar par tayar. Be tayar par tayar. Be ready for a different, because today the fight is different than it was 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So
Exactly.
arming yourself with that knowledge and with those capabilities, I think, is key.
All right, I took up too much time. Next question.
You're good, man. Thank you for that.
My questions next. Yeah, definitely. Do you think that modern Sikhs have become too pacifist and too concerned with appealing to moderates in the law, which is obviously due to British colonialism, when historically the Sikhs have been peaceful, but as well at the same time violent and rebellious, i.e., the missiles, Dals, Khal Saraj, and how they were buggy?
Absolutely. See, I think this actually leads in a little bit to the last question we answered about the optics of the Nishan Sahib. So the Nishan Sahib is our spirit of sovereignty. So it's about how much we can spin the optics and in which angle we can play it so that, I mean, number one, we recognize that, I think it should be recognized within people that violence is not in our vocabulary. Resistance isn't within our vocabulary. The way that we were, the tyar par tyar, persona and the tyar par tyar agenda that Guru Gobind Singh Ji said that all my Sikhs should have is a kesh, kara, kirpan, kashara, keski. All these different things are things that you should be ready with. Those things themselves make you sovereign. So we are working very hard. And see, so this is why I'm saying there is a role for politicians. So if you're a politically minded person and you want to raise your voice within whatever politics, go ahead and do that if that's what you're naturally inclined to do. But just I think it's important to remember that Sikhs have and will continue to operate under sovereignty. Either they are the rulers or they're fighting the oppressors. It's one or the other. They're never laying down in the face of oppression. And we're seeing that at this angle again. So, yeah, I think there are narratives in the West now that are the antithesis of the Sikh ideology, especially when it comes to self defense, especially when it comes to weaponry. Because you show pictures of Sanjanel Singh now, and it looks like a bunch of terrorists with guns. But when you think about in the 80s and 90s, the type of oppression they were facing, you needed to have that to defend yourselves and to defend other people that couldn't defend themselves. So again, this reevaluation, not only now, I guess, of the language that the Godi media is using, but reevaluation of yourself and saying, what are things that I hold as my priorities? What are things that I hold above importance above others? And what is the true message? And I think that true message can only come from Gurbani. That true message can only come from being that, or at least aspiring to be Sant Sipahi. What Guru Gobind Singh Ji and what Guru Har Gobind Ji, what all of our gurus said is being a saint soldier. Those two things coincide. If you're one, it's going to be hard to know what the other is doing. It's going to be hard to be a complete person. But the Sant Sipahi role, the Baghi or Badshah, Baghi ja Badshah, either I'm a rebel or I'm a ruler. It's one of those two things. And I think keeping that ideology is paramount. While, because those things do not reduce your ability to be human, they actually make you a better human. And there are laws that are oppressive. So fighting those laws is also becomes your duty. If there's a law created tomorrow that says it's now legal to be abusive, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a problem for Sikhs, no matter whether the law says it or not. In India right now, it is not considered sexual assault to molest someone above their clothes. I think it was 12 or under. I forget the specifics of the laws, but it's not considered sexual assault. So that is problematic, and recognizing those problematic laws is a part of our history. It's a part of our heritage. It's a part of what our people have done for hundreds of years. And I don't think it goes away just because we live in Canada or we live in America or the UK and we have these, in quotation, so-called civilized societies.
Of course. And this would kind of continue on with Gurcivic's question from before. So if we do, if we do have this understanding, then how do we convince the Sikhs in the broader diaspora and then in Punjab as well, that, at a certain point that working through the realm of the law becomes impossible to the game that you're trying to achieve? This is similar to the protests being done in America right now too, with the Black Lives Matter protests that were happening too. And then to a certain extent internally, that there is a group that thinks, hey, we've been fighting for these progression for like hundreds of years and nothing's happening. We need to explore alternative methods of, producing change. So do you think that's viable inside of the Sikh struggle today? And then if so, how do we convince our diaspora and our community that this would be a methodology that we need to start adopting again, because it's been lost for so long?
Well, number one, I think, is awareness. Sikhs have always been more Malcolm than Martin. Sikhs have always been more Bhagat Singh than Gandhi. That's just the way it is, because we understand that there's a role that this type of resistance plays within the larger things. But the thing is, nonviolence and this idea of not being that inconvenient falls into the narrative of what is organizable, what is within the realm of you to control. So the Gandhis and these type of non-violent figures will always be brought up to a pedestal to say that, their whole movement, everything that they did is the way it should be done. When in reality, you need both. You need the peace, but you also need the spirit of resistance to say, I'm not going to, if you slap me on one side of my face, I'm going to turn the other cheek. That is an ideology that will cause you to fail, and that has caused people to fail, but it has been unfortunately painted as the successful way to do things. So as we progress as educated individuals, at least the worldly aspect of educated, we will start to understand that a lot of these figures that we have propped up as angelic are problematic. And I think that will start to get the wheels turning. And as far as convincing, my ideology on convincing other people has always been live the example, be the example. Because your type of activism, if you feel like that's the right way to go, it will attract a crowd. Sanjay Singh didn't have to tell people to follow him. They saw him and they followed his message. Like we were talking about Deep Sidhu. He didn't have to convince thousands of people to head to Delhi. The spirit within them said, these barricades are nothing to us. These water cannons are nothing to us. Move out of the way. We're not going to sit in front of them. So be that leader or encourage that type of thought. But do not be concerned about who you're convincing and who you're not convincing, because the people that have led revolutions have always come from the few. They have never come from the many. The many join along. They don't join along. They kind of turn with the tides. But the catalyst for change is always going to be the few. So being a part of that few, reflecting the ideology of that few, falls upon us as people that understand the larger context of things. So Gurkarn, I got about 9 minutes, man. I got to go to another meeting at 3, but I have 9 minutes. Yeah. Yeah. How do we fight internet censorship? I think what's happening right now is an excellent start. You're raising awareness. You're dragging down this facade that India is a democracy. And once you drag that down, they'll call you a separatist. They'll call you violent. They'll call you whatever they want. But the fact of the matter is, if that leadership wasn't there, these type of aspirations wouldn't exist. So the moment you start to say that Modi is a problematic figure, then you start to look around and say who's affiliated with Modi, and then you easily come to the Mark Zuckerbergs, these censorship, these Jack Dorseys, all these people that are actively censoring or standing in the way of stopping the censorship. These people come into question. So I would say it's always a daunting task. When there was thousands of Sikhs left living in jungles, it was a daunting task to even think of existence. But look where we are today. So the powers in front of us have always seemed impossible to overcome. But this overcoming happens with our resistance. So if, again, your form of resistance is you can make great infographics and convincing arguments and or even make jokes or memes or whatever you do saying something about Mark Zuckerberg, those go such a long way. Sometimes I'll spend 10 minutes making a point and someone will come up with a meme that says the same thing in 10 words. And I'm like, wow, I wish I could have done that. So this is the type of creativity we need to cultivate within our community, within our people. And this is the type of activism we need to say that exists within the community that we need to, project. It's beyond the selfies, it's beyond the breakfasts and the lunches and the cool outfits. All of that is great and it plays a role. But the essence of humanity is going to lie in helping your fellow man. And helping your fellow man comes to becoming the best version of yourself, and on and on and on and on again. It's a cycle. But the resistance of this censorship is going to be, expose their character, talk about who they are. This digital India that Modi has been trying to sell, that he's saying that, this all of India is so much better, even though people within his cabinet are saying Muslims aren't even equal, is oppressing the farmers and the most vulnerable populations of India. Expose that. Then anyone associated with them also gets exposed. And I think the ball is rolling in that direction right now. Yeah, closing thoughts would be Paul Chukmath. I expressed my opinions based on where I am at the current time. They may be correct or incorrect based on your experiences and your observations. So, again, these are my experiences. I will not claim to say that something is a fact or not a fact. I will just present them, and then I would welcome counter arguments. In fact, I've changed my opinion a lot within these protests. So, continuing to question people, being respectful about it, I think is key. So again, if I may have said something that you don't agree with or that hurt you, I genuinely apologize for that.
ਗੱਜ ਕੇ ਜਕਾਰ ਕੇ ਜਾਵੇ ਨਿਹਾਲ ਹੋ ਜਾਵੇ ਧੰਨ ਧੰਨ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਗੋਬਿੰਦ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਦੇ ਮਨ ਨੂੰ ਭਾਵੇ
ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ
ਸਤਿ
ਅਕਾਲ।
ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ।
Gurbarakal, Deg Deg Fateh.